This week, as many as 15,000 members of the National Guard could be deployed in Washington, D.C., and the FBI is warning of plans for armed protests in all 50 state capitals. As a result, National Guard troops are on standby in several states around the country, and our nation's capital is on high alert. But this is not the first time an inauguration has had security concerns. Shortly before Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated on March 4, 1861, with the country on the brink of a civil war, our forefathers found themselves in an eerily similar situation. After the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, but before his inauguration of March 1861, the United States changed dramatically. The political and economic tensions between the northern industrialized states and the southern agrarian states reached a fever pitch as states previously leaning towards secession held formal votes and left the Union in order to form what would become the Confederate States of America. On December 20, 1860, the state of South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union, with 6 other states seceding before the inauguration was to take place in March. Threats of violence had been numerous and real ever since Lincoln's election back in November. As the candidate of the new anti-slavery Republican Party, Lincoln had won the majority of the electoral votes, but only 40% of the popular vote because he had faced 3 challengers in the general election. In response to his victory, South Carolina announced it was seceding from the Union. 6 more states followed suit in the run-up to Inauguration Day. In mid-February, Congress convened to count the Electoral College votes. The election process gave the South a chance to turn back the election. Through parliamentary maneuver or sleight of hand, it might be possible to declare a miscount and throw Lincoln's election back into the cloakroom where Congress could pick a different winner. Overseeing the Electoral College certification was Vice President John C. Breckinridge in his role as President of the Senate. Breckinridge also happened to have just finished second to Lincoln in the election. Rumors circulated that plotters planned to blow up the Capitol or other public buildings to prevent Lincoln being sworn in. Other reports claimed that militias would attack the city and disrupt the count. And in fact, as Congress gathered to certify the electoral vote, an angry mob attempted to force its way into the Capitol, but General Scott had stationed troops around the building, declaring that anyone who entered the building, attempting to stop the count, would be lashed to the muzzle of a 12-pound cannon and fired out of the window of the Capitol. The mob apparently took Scott at his word, and the count was allowed to take place. Despite the tensions and his own political ambitions, Breckinridge fulfilled his constitutional duties to assure an accurate count and certify Lincoln's victory. As Inauguration Day approached, Lincoln's allies received information regarding threats to assassinate the president-elect. In fact, it was an open secret that the inauguration could be disrupted. Newspapers had been reporting about possible attacks for more than a month, stating in one account, "It is true that serious fears have been entertained of an attempt to prevent the inauguration of Mr. Lincoln, and perhaps to seize upon the federal capital by armed bands from the border slave states of Virginia and Maryland, aided by volunteers from neighboring slave states." Other newspapers, particularly in the South, downplayed the threats, even though a plot to kidnap and assassinate the president-elect had been thwarted in Baltimore as Lincoln traveled from Springfield, Illinois to Washington. Private Detective Alan Pinkerton had been informed of the plot and arranged to have the telegraph lines cut into the city so that conspirators could not communicate between Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Baltimore. Pinkerton also secretly changed Lincoln's train schedule so that he would arrive into Washington early. After arriving in Washington, the burden of Lincoln's safety fell once again on the shoulders of Lieutenant General Winfield Scott, the celebrated war hero and head of the U.S. Army, who had just protected the Capitol from being stormed. He wrote of this duty as the most critical and hazardous event with which I have ever been connected. Not only was Lincoln's life endangered by the Southern secessionists, but Scott himself received many death threats if he dared to protect the ceremony by military force. Scott rounded up as many soldiers as possible from his scant forces so that when Lincoln rode to the Capitol, a reporter noted, his carriage was closely surrounded on all sides by marshals and cavalry, so as to almost hide it from view. As Lincoln's protection detail moved towards the Capitol, thousands of troops lined the streets, and a 16-year-old Julia Taft with her mother watched the procession from a hardware store because they thought the Capitol might prove too dangerous. She stated, "As we took our places, a file of green-coated sharpshooters went through up to the roof, and the whisper went round that they had received orders to shoot at anyone crowding toward the president's carriage." Julia watched Lincoln and his predecessor ride by in an open carriage and noticed that the crowd seemed hostile toward Lincoln, hearing a woman remark, "There goes that Illinois ape, the cursed abolitionist, but he will never come back alive." Another observer, Charles Stone, wrote in a letter to his wife that a very large military escort accompanied the procession and stood guard about the Speaker's stand and Capitol. The carriage containing the President-elect and President Buchanan was escorted into a hollow square, completely surrounded by cavalry. Stone also noted that he saw a light artillery detachment stationed with cannons near City Hall. Each cannon was attached to a team of 6 horses, with soldiers standing by, ready to spring into the saddle at a moment's warning. In 5 minutes after the word should be given, those cannons could have been placed in the Capitol grounds and fired. When the presidential party reached the Capitol, the next stop was the Senate chamber. There, outgoing Vice President John Breckinridge spoke briefly, and his successor, Hannibal Hamlin, took the oath of office. Senator Edward D. Baker, a longtime friend of the Lincolns, then introduced the president-elect to a crowd of about 25,000 people. Carl Schurz, another political friend who watched the proceedings intently, stated, "I saw Lincoln step forward to the desk upon which the Bible lay, his rugged face appearing above all those surrounding him calm and sad. He pulled out a pair of reading glasses, secured his manuscript with a gold-headed cane, and tried to lay down his new silk hat, and then I witnessed the most remarkable scene when Lincoln, about to deliver his inaugural address, could not at once find a convenient place for his hat, and so it was that Senator Stephen Douglas took that hat and held it like an attendant while Lincoln was speaking." Schurz also observed James Buchanan, the outgoing president, and noted, "Here's the man who had done more than any other to degrade and demoralize the national government and to encourage the rebellion, now to retire to an unhonored obscurity." In his speech, Lincoln appealed directly to those opposing him, stating, "We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have been strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when touched again, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." 1 month later, the first shots rang out at Fort Sumter, ushering in 4 years of what would ultimately be the bloodiest war in American history. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe and tune in Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock for the Civil War Diaries. And if you'd like to support the channel, for a limited time there's exclusive Civil War Diaries merchandise available in the video link below.
Boom!